Have you ever had a moment where everything in your life looks fine? Nothing terrible is happening. You're not in crisis. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing, but instead something feels off. You feel strangely empty. Not sad exactly, not depressed, just disconnected. Like something is missing. Sometimes you even feel guilty about it. You tell yourself, why do I feel like this? My life isn't that bad. But that feeling stays. Then there are days when something small happens, a tiny inconvenience, a small problem, a short conversation, and suddenly it feels huge. Your mind fills with pressure. Your emotions feel heavy. Your energy disappears. And you wonder, why do I feel overwhelmed so easily? Why do I get emotionally drained so quickly? Why do I feel anxious about the future even when things are okay right now? Why do I feel pressure all the time? Why do I feel mentally exhausted even when I didn't do that much today? These questions are incredibly common. Millions of people quietly experience the same emotional pattern. They go to work, they interact with friends, they post normal things online, but internally they feel lost, tired, disconnected, and often they assume something is wrong with them. But the truth is much deeper than that. These emotional patterns aren't random. They are the result of how the modern world interacts with the human brain. Because your brain was not designed for the environment you're living in today. It was designed for survival in completely different world. And once you understand this, many of these confusing emotional patterns start to make sense. So in this video, we are going to explore the psychology behind questions like, why do I feel empty even when life is okay? Why do I feel guilty when I rest? Why do small problems feel so big? Why do I feel constant pressure? Why does my mind feel exhausted all the time? And why do so many people quietly feel like something is missing in their life? By the end of this video, you will understand what your brain is actually doing and why these emotional patterns are far more common than you think. Why you feel empty even when life is okay. One of the most confusing emotional experiences is feeling empty when nothing is obviously wrong. People often describe it like this: my life is fine, but something feels missing. This feeling doesn't usually comes from a single problem. Instead, it comes from lack of meaning combined with mental overload. Humans evolved to experience meaning through purposeful effort, social connection, clear challenges, visible progress. But modern life often removes these experiences. And many people spend most of their day sitting, looking at screens, completing tasks that feel disconnected from real impact, constantly consuming information instead of creating anything meaningful. When the brain doesn't experience progress, challenge, or purpose, it begins to feel emotionally flat. Not sad, not joyful, just empty. Another reason for this feeling is dopamine saturation. In the modern world, we constantly stimulate our brain with social media, short videos, endless scrolling, notifications, instant environment. and entertainments. These activities flood the brain with stalled dopamine spikes. At first, they feel exciting, but over time, the brain adapts. The same stimulation produces less emotional response, and eventually, ordinary life begins to feel dull by comparison. So, when someone says nothing feels exciting anymore, it's often because the brain has been trained to expect constant stimulation. Real life cannot compete with that level of stimulation. And the result is emotional numbness. When you feel guilty, when you rest, have you ever tried to relax? And instead of feeling calm, you felt guilty. You sit down, you take a break, but your mind keeps saying, you should be doing something. You're wasting time. You're falling behind. This experience is incredibly common in modern culture because many people unconsciously tie their self worth to productivity. Somewhere along the way, we learn a dangerous idea: rest equal laziness. But biologically, rest is essential. The brain needs recovery time to process information, regulate emotions, and restore energy. Without rest, cognitive performance actually declines. But when someone has internalized the belief that their value comes from constant productivity, rest feels like failure, even if they're exhausted, even if they have worked hard all week, even if their body is asking for recovery. Their mind refuses to allow it. And this creates a painful loop. You feel tired, you try to rest, you feel guilty. The guilt creates a stress. The stress prevents a real recovery. So you remain mentally exhausted. Breaking this loop requires changing the belief that productivity equals worth. Your value as a human being is not measured how busy you are. But many people spend years unconsciously believing it is. Why you feel overwhelmed so easily? Feeling overwhelmed often has less to do with the size of your problems and more to do with the number of things competing for your attention. The human brain has limited cognitive bandwidth. It can only process a certain amount of information at once. But modern life constantly floods the brain with input: messages, notifications, news, emails, work tasks, social expectations, future worries. Even small responsibilities began stacking up mentally. Individually, they seem manageable, but together they create cognitive overload. And when the brain becomes overloaded, it signals distress through the feeling of overwhelm. Your mind is essentially saying, too many inputs. I can't process everything. This is why sometimes even a small new task can feel unbearable. Not because the task is large, but because your brain is already carrying too much. So why you get emotionally drained so quickly? Emotional energy is a real psychological resource, and certain activities drain it faster than others. For example, constant decision making drains mental energy. Overthinking drains emotional energy. Social interactions can drain energy, especially for people who are sensitive to other people's emotion. Trying to control everything drains energy. And one of the biggest drains is internal pressure. When someone constantly tells themselves, I have to be better, I have to fix my life, I should be doing more, Their brain is under continuous stress, even if nothing dramatic is happening externally. The pressure comes from inside. And internal pressure can be one of the most exhausting forces a person experiences. So, why small problems feel huge? Like, have you ever noticed how sometimes a tiny issue feels overwhelming? Like a small mistake, a short argument, a minor inconvenience. Suddenly, it feels emotionally huge. This happens because your brain doesn't evaluate problems logically when stress level are high, when the brain is already overloaded. Even small triggers can activate the emotional response system. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, becomes more sensitive. So minor problems feel like major threats. This is why emotional resilience often decreases when someone is already stressed or exhausted. The problem isn't the event itself, it's the state of the nervous system when the event occurs. And why you feel anxious about the future? One of the most exhausting emotional patterns people experience is constant future anxiety. Even when things are relatively stable right now, the mind begins imagining what would go wrong. Like, what if I fail? What if I never figure my life out? And what if I'm wasting my potential? So, what if things get worse? The strange thing about this kind of anxiety is that it often appears when nothing is actually happening. You could be sitting quietly in your room, and suddenly your mind starts projecting years into the future, possible problems, possible mistakes, possible regrets. So, your brain is essentially running thousands of hypothetical simulations. And while your body is physically safe in the present moment, your mind is mentally living in imagined future. This happens because the human brain evolved to predict threats before they happen. Thousands of years ago, anticipating danger was extremely valuable. If early human predicts storms, predators, or resource shortages, they had a better chance of surviving. So the brain developed a powerful system designed to ask one question repeatedly. What could go wrong? In the modern world, however, that system often becomes overreactive. Instead of helping us avoid immediate physical danger, it starts analyzing abstract life scenarios like career uncertainty, financial stability, relationships, personal identity, long term success. The brain tries to control the future by thinking about it constantly. But here is the problem. Thinking about the future rarely gives the brain real control over it. So instead of solving the uncertainty, the mind becomes trapped in endless speculation. This creates a loop. Future uncertainty, anxiety thinking, temporary mental control, more uncertainty, more anxiety, anxious thinking. Over time, the brain begins to treat uncertainty itself as a threat. And because the future is always uncertain, the anxiety never fully disappears. And why you feel pressure like all the time? The reason is many people describe a constant invisible weight on their mind, even when nothing urgent is happening. even during moments that are supposed to be relaxing. There is still pressure. A quiet voice in the background saying, you should be doing more. You should be further in life. You should be better than this. This kind of pressure rarely comes from single external source. Instead, it forms from multiple layers of expectation. Expectations from society, expectation from family, expectations from friends, and the most powerful one, expectation from yourself. Modern culture constantly exposes us to images of success through social media, videos, news, and online content we see. People building businesses, people traveling the world, people achieving financial independence, people becoming expert at incredibly young ages. The brain naturally compares itself to what it sees, and comparison creates pressure. So even if those comparisons are unrealistic, even if they only represent a tiny percentage of reality, over time the brain internalizes a message: I am behind. And when someone believes they are behind in life, every day starts to feel like a race against time. That is when pressure becomes constant. Even rest feels uncomfortable because the mind is convinced it should be doing something to catch up. So, you sometimes feel lost in life? Feeling lost is one of the most universal human experiences. Almost everyone experiences periods where they question, what am I doing with my life? Am I on the right path? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? These questions appears when the brain realizes something important. There is no clear map for life. Unlike school, where the path is structured, life after that becomes ambiguous. There are thousands of possible directions: careers, relationships, goals, locations, identities. The brain struggles with this level of openness because too many choices can create decision paralysis. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. When options increases, satisfaction often decreases because every decision eliminates other possibilities. And the brain begins wondering, what if the other option was better? This is why people sometimes feel lost even when they're doing objectively well. Because uncertainty about direction creates psychological discomfort. But interestingly, feeling lost can also mean something positive. It often means the brain is questioning old patterns, old identities, old expectations, and searching for something more meaningful. In other words, feeling lost can be the beginning of discovering a new direction. Why it feels like something is missing. One of the most difficult emotions to explain is the quiet feeling that something is missing, not a specific thing, just a sense of incompetence, like life should feel fuller than it currently does. The feeling often appears when people are living extremely structured lives, but internally disconnected ones. Like, for example, a person may have a stable job, a normal routine, emotional relationships, but internally they feel disconnected from meaning. This happens when daily activities are focused mostly on maintenance instead of growth or purpose. The brain needs experiences that create progress, challenge, contribution, connection. When those elements are missing, life begins to feel repetitive, predictable, flat, and eventually emotionally empty. Another factor is suppressed curiosity. Many people had strong interests growing up, creative activities, personal passions, curiosity about the world. But over time, those interests get replaced by responsibilities, works, bills, expectations, efficiency. And when curiosity disappears, a part of the human experience disappears with it. The brain is built to explore, learn, and create. When those needs are ignored for a long period of time, something begins to feel missing, even if everything on the surface appears stable. So, why you feel mentally tired all the time? Mental exhaustion is one of the most common experiences in the modern world. And it often confuses people because it doesn't always come from physical effort. You can sit at a desk all day and still feel completely drained. This happens because mental energy is consumed by cognitive activity, not just physical activity. Thinking uses enormous amount of brain energy, especially certain types of thinking. For example, overthinking, decision making, emotional regulations, self criticism, future planning. These processes constantly activate the brain's executive systems. And when they run all day long without breaks, mental fatigue accumulates, right? Another major contributor is attention fragmentation. Modern technology constantly interrupts focus. Notifications, messages, emails, short videos, information feeds. Every interruption forces the brain to switch context, and context switching is extremely expensive cognitively, right? The brain must pause one process, activate another, then later returns to the original task. This repeated switching drains mental resources much faster than sustained focus. So by the end of the day, even if nothing dramatic happens, your brain feels exhausted. Not because you did nothing, but because your attention was pulled into too many directions. The hidden cost of constantly thinking. One of the biggest drains of emotional energy is something many people barely notice anymore. Constant thinking. The mind really stops. It analyzes conversation, replays past mistakes, imagining future outcomes, evaluates personal decisions, compares life to others. Even during moments that should be barely and relaxing, the brain continues processing. This endless internal dialogue consumes enormous mental energy, and most people never intentionally pause it. The brain becomes like a computer running dozens of programs at the same time. Eventually, the system slows down. Fatigue appears, clarity disappears, and the person begins feeling mentally overwhelmed. Learning to occasionally quiet the mental noise is one of the most powerful ways to restore emotional balance. But many people, why emotional recovery takes time? Just like muscle needs recovery after physical exercise, the brain needs recovery after emotional effort. But modern life rarely provides that recovery. Instead, emotional stress accumulates. Work stress, social pressure, information overload, internal expectations, all layered on top of each other. Without intentional recovery time, the brain never fully resets. And when the nervous system remains activated for long periods, emotional exhaustions become the default state. Recovery requires slowing down the system, reducing stimulation, allowing the brain to process, experiencing instead of constantly reacting to new ones. But in a fast-moving world, many people never give their mind the space it needs to recover. So, why emotional sensitivity feels stronger today? Have you ever noticed how emotions seems to feel stronger than they used to be? Small things can suddenly trigger large emotional reactions. A message that doesn't get answered, a small mistake at work, a short conversation that didn't go the way you expected. Something tiny can linger in your mind for hours, sometimes even days. Many people interpret this as personal weakness. They tell themselves, why am I so sensitive? Why can't I just ignore it? But what is actually happening is something deeper. The modern brain is constantly stimulated and stressed at the same time. Your nervous system rarely gets a chance to fully relax. Every day you're exposed to notifications, messages, news updates, social comparisons, information overload, and emotional content. And even if each one seems small, together they create continuous background stress. Your nervous system stays slightly activated all the time. When the nervous system is in this state, emotional responses become amplified. The brain becomes more reactive. This means small triggers can feel disproportionately large, right? Not because you're weak, but because your nervous system has been running in high alert mode for too long. So the hidden exhaustion of modern life is many people feel tired even when their day didn't include physical effort. This confuses them. They think, I didn't do much today. Why do I feel so drained? But the exhaustions many people experience today is cognitive exhaustion, not physical exhaustion. Your brain is processing an enormous amount of information every day, much more than humans experience historically. Think about the average modern day. You wake up and check your phone. Your brain processes dozens of messages, emails, notifications, social media updates, news. Then throughout the day, your attention constantly shifts. Work task, digital communication, information streams, small decisions. Each one requires mental energy. Your brain is constantly switching between tasks and contexts, and every switch consumes energy. Psychologists call this attention residue. When you move from one task to another, a small portion of your attention stays behind on the previous task. Over time, these fragments of attention accumulates. Your mind becomes cluttered. By the end of the day, your brain feels like a computer with too many tabs open. Even though nothing dramatic happened, your cognitive resources are depleted. So why your mind feels like it never stops? One of the most common experiences people describe is this: my brain never turns off. Even when you're trying to relax, even when you're lying in bed at night, your mind keeps thinking, replaying events from the day, imagining future scenarios, evaluating conversation, analyzing decisions. The brain is designed to solve problems. That is one of its most powerful ability. But when there are no immediate problem to solve, the brain often creates hypothetical ones. It begins scanning your life for potential issues, like unfinished tasks, uncertain outcomes, possible mistakes. The mind treats these possibilities as problems that need solving. So the thinking continues and continues and continues. But here is the catch. Most of these imagined problems cannot actually be solved in the moment. You can't fully control the future. You can't change the past. So the mind loops through the same thoughts repeatedly. This loop creates the feeling of mental noise. The brain is active but not productive. It is running simulation that rarely lead to real solutions. Over time, this constant thinking becomes exhausting. The emotional cost of comparison is one of the most powerful psychological forces in human life. And in small amounts, it can be useful. It helps people learn, improve, and understand social norms. But in the modern world, comparison has reached levels that human brain was never meant to handle. For most of human history, people compared themselves to a small group, like a family, friends, neighbors, maybe a few dozen people. But today, the brain is exposed to thousands of lies every day. Through social media and online content, you see people achieving success, people are traveling the world, people building businesses, people showing their happiest moments, people displaying curated version of your life. Your brain interprets this image as reality, even though they represent only a tiny highlights someone's life, and the comparison happens automatically. You may not even notice it consciously, right? But the brain ask questions like, why is my life not like that? Why am I not that successful yet? Like, why am I not as confident as that person? Each comparison creates a small emotional impact. Individually, they seem insignificant, but repeated hundreds of times over weeks and months, they shape how a person feels about their own life. And slowly the brain begins believing something subtle but powerful. I'm behind. So why pressure and comparison creates emotional fatigue? When someone constantly feels behind in life, pressure increases. Every decision feels more important. Every mistake feels more significant. Every day feels like another opportunity that could be wasted. This creates a state psychologists call chronic cognitive pressure. Your brain feels like it is constantly being evaluated, even if no one else is judging you. Your internal voice becomes the judge. And when the mind is constantly evaluating itself, emotional fatigue appears. The brain cannot stay in a state of pressure indefinitely without consequences. Eventually, it begins showing signs of burnout, low motivation, mental exhaustion, difficulty focusing, loss of excitement, and emotional numbness. At this point, many people assume something is wrong with them. But in reality, their brain has simply been under too much internal pressure for too long, right? So why feeling lost can actually be a turning point? Earlier we talked about the feeling of being lost. But there is another side to this experience that most people don't realize. Feeling lost often means the brain is questioning an old identity. Maybe you follow the path because it was expected. A certain career, a certain lifestyle, a certain definition of success. But over time, your mind begins asking deeper questions. Is this actually what I want? Does this life feel meaningful to me? Is there something else I should be doing? These questions can feel uncomfortable because they challenge stability, but they also open the door to something powerful. Self-awareness. Many people only begin discovering their real value after a period of uncertainty. Feeling lost can be the brain's way of saying the old map doesn't fit anymore. And sometimes that realization is the first step toward finding a path that actually feels meaningful. The quiet disconnection many people feel is another emotional pattern people describe is that they move through daily life, work, responsibilities, conversations, but internal they feel slightly detached. Like they're watching life instead of fully experiencing it. This feeling often appears when people spend long period of operating in automatic mode. Their days becomes routine. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. There is nothing necessarily wrong with this routine, but when life becomes purely mechanical, emotional engagement decreases. The brain begins craving experiences that feel real. Moments of curiosity, moments of creativity, moments of connection. Without these experiences, life can begin to feel flat. And the brain interprets this flatness as disconnection. So, why mental exhaustion is becoming normal? The most important thing to understand is this: the emotional pattern we have been discussing are becoming extremely common. Feeling overwhelmed, feeling mentally tired, feeling anxious about the future, feeling like something is missing. These experiences are not rare. They're becoming normal responses to a world that constantly stimulates the brain without allowing enough recovery. The human brain evolves for environments that includes quiet, nature, physical movement, face-to-face connection, clear daily challenges. Modern life replaces many of these experiences with screens, constant information, abstract problems, endless comparisons, and attention fragmentation. The brain is still trying to adapt, but adaptation takes time. And until people learn how to manage their mental environment, emotional fatigue will continue appearing in more and more lives. So, why is slowing down feels so uncomfortable? One of the strongest things about modern life is that many people say they want peace, but when they finally slow down, they feel uncomfortable. Imagine someone finishes a long day and finally sit down without distractions, no phone, no music, no TV, just silence. Within minutes, something interesting happens. Their mind start racing, thoughts appears, words surface, unfinished tasks suddenly feel urgent. Emotions they have been ignoring quietly rise to the surface. And because this feels uncomfortable, the brain immediately reaches for stimulation again. The phone, the TV, the endless scroll. But this reaction reveals something important. Many people are not actually tired of stimulation. They're avoiding what appears when the stimulation disappears. Silence exposes the thoughts we have been pushing away. It exposes emotions that were buried under constant activity. This is why slowing down feels uncomfortable at first. Your brain finally begins processing everything it has been carrying, right? But if someone allows that process to happen, something remarkable begins to occur. The mental noise slowly fades, the nervous system begins calm down and clearly starts returning. The mind becomes quieter, not instantly, but gradually. Earlier, we talked about how the brain consumes enormous energy through thinking, decision making, and emotional regulation. But the brain also requires intentional recovery. And recovery looks very different from the kind of rest most people practice today. Scrolling through social media may feel like relaxation, but neurologically, it's still stimulation. Watching endless videos might feel like a break, but the brain is still processing information. True mental recovery involves reducing input, moments where the brain is not required to constantly react. Historically, humans experience natural mental recovery through simple life activities like walking long distances, spending time outdoor, quiet conversation, manual work, periods of silence. These experiences allows the brain to process emotions and reset its internal system. Modern life removed many of these natural recovery moments. Instead, stimulation continues almost nonstop. which means many people go days, weeks, even months without truly allowing their brain to reset. This is one of the reasons mental exhaustions accumulates so easily. The brain is always running but rarely resting. So why reconnecting with curiosity changes everything? When people feel emotionally empty, they often assume they need something dramatic to fix it, like a new job, a major life change, a completely different lifestyle. But sometimes the real solution is much smaller. It begins with curiosity. Curiosity is one of the most powerful psychological forces in the human brain. It activates motivation, creativity, exploration, learning, and most importantly, engagement with life. When someone becomes curious again, their relationship with the world changes. Instead of simply reacting to daily responsibilities, they began exploring. They ask questions. They try new activities. They learn new ideas. Curiosity brings back something many adults slowly lose over time, a sense of discovery. And discovery naturally increases dopamine in a healthy, sustainable way. Unlike the quick spike created by digital stimulation, curiosity creates deeper, longer lasting engagement. This is why people who regularly explore new interests feel more mentally energized. Their brain is experiencing novelty in a meaningful way, not just consuming endless information, but actively engaging with it. The power of small, meaningful action. So when someone feels lost, overwhelmed, or emotionally disconnected, the idea of fixing their life can feel impossible. The brain interprets it as a huge problem. And huge problem often lead to paralysis. But meaningful change rarely comes from massive overnight transformation. It comes from small, repeated actions. Small actions that reconnect the person with their sense of agency. For example, going for a quick walk without distractions, writing down thoughts instead of carrying them mentally, calling someone you care about, learning something new out of pure curiosity. These actions may seem insignificant, but psychologically, they signal something important to the brain. I am participating in my life again. That shift is perception begins restoring a sense of control. And when people regain a sense of control, emotional pressure decreases dramatically. Because one of the most exhausting feelings as a person can experience is the belief that their life is happening to them instead of through them. Small intentional action reverse that belief. So why meaning comes from contribution? Another powerful source of emotional energy comes from something human evolved to value deeply. Contribution. So when people feel like their actions matter to someone else, their brain experiences a sense of purpose. This can happen in many ways, like helping someone, sharing knowledge, supporting a friend, creating something useful, teaching something you have learned. Contribution creates a psychological signal that your presence in this world has impact. And impact creates meaning. Many people who feel empty are not actually lacking success. They're lacking meaningful connection between their effort and its impact. For example, someone may work extremely hard in a job, but if they don't see how their work help anyone, the effort begins to feel hollow. When people reconnect effort with contribution, motivation often returns naturally, because the brain recognizes that effort matters. Relearning how to be present, one of the most powerful way to reduce emotional overwhelm, is something incredibly simple. Learning how to be present again. The human brain constantly moves between three time frames: the past, the present, the future. But most mental suffering occurs when the mind spends too much time in the past or future. Regret lives in the past, anxiety lives in the future. The present moment is usually far less dramatic than the stories the brain tells about time. But many people rarely experience the present moment fully. Their attention is divided half on the current activity, half on the future worries, half on past events. When someone practices bringing their attention fully into what they are doing right now, something surprising happens. The mental noises decreases, emotional intensity decreases, the nervous system relaxes because the brain is no longer stimulating dozens of hypothetical scenarios. It is simply experiencing what is actually happening. And most of the time, the present moment is much calmer than the mind predicted. So, why emotional balance is a skill? Many people assume emotional balance is something you either have or you don't. But in reality, emotional balance is a skill. Just like physical fitness, it can be developed through repeated practice. Small habits that support emotional stability might include regular quiet time, reducing unnecessary digital stimulation, practicing reflection instead of constant distraction, allowing emotions to be processed instead of suppressed. So these habits train the nervous system to move between stress and recovery more smoothly. And over time, the brain becomes less reactive. Problems still occur, changes still appear, but the emotional response becomes more balanced. The beginning of clarity when someone begins slowing down, reconnecting with curiosity, contributing to others, and becoming more present. Something subtle but powerful begins to happen. Clarity happens, not all at once. Not as a dramatic life revolution, but as a small insight and realization about what matters, and clearer understanding of personal values. A stronger sense of direction. These insights rarely appear when the mind is overloaded with stimulation and pressure. They appear when the brain finally has space to think clearly. Clarity grows in quiet environment, and once clarity begins appearing, many emotional struggles start making sense because the person begins understanding themselves more deeply. Let me say something that might reframe your entire personality. You're not too nice. You were trained to be safe. People pleasing isn't kindness, it is survival. You say yes when you want to say no. You over explain. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. You scan the room before you speak. And you call it being considerate. But your body is doing something else. It is scanning for threat. If conflict once meant rejection, or anger, or withdrawal, your nervous system learned quickly: keep the peace, stay liked, don't upset anyone. Because being disliked didn't feel uncomfortable, it felt dangerous. So you became agreeable, adaptable, low maintenance. You learned how to read micro expressions, tone shifts, energy changes. You became emotionally intelligent out of necessity, not preference. People pleasing is a fawn response: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn says, if I make you comfortable, you won't hurt me. It is not manipulation, it is protection. Here is the part most people don't see. You don't even know what you want half the time because you're so used to adjusting to everyone else. You ask, what do you want to do? You say, I'm good with anything. You shape shift in relationships, and over time, you lose yourself. The problem with people pleasing isn't generosity, it is self abandonment. Every time you override your needs to maintain harmony, your nervous system logs something. My needs are less important. And eventually, you start believing it. Here is where resentment is born. You give and give and give, but no one seems to give back the same way. You feel unappreciated, overlooked, taken for granted, but you train people not to see your limits because you never show them. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you said no without explaining yourself? If that idea makes your chest tighten, that is the survival wiring. People pleasing feels safe short term, but long term, it builds quiet anger, burnout, emotional exhaustion. Because authenticity requires risk, and risk once felt unsafe. Here's the shift. You can be kind without being compliant. You can be compassionate without self-erasing. You can be generous without overextending. But your nervous system has to learn that conflict doesn't equal abandonment. That someone being disappointed doesn't equal danger. Boundaries are not aggression. They're clarity. And clarity feels uncomfortable when you were rewarded for being agreeable. The first time you set a real boundary, you will feel guilty. Not because you did something wrong, but because your body isn't used to safety without approval. People pleasing is often praised. You're so easy. You're so supportive. You're so understanding. But being easy is not the same as being secure. Being liked isn't the same as being known. Here's a deeper question. If you stopped managing everyone else's emotions, who would you be? If you allowed someone to be upset with you, would you survive it? You would. But your nervous system doesn't know that yet. Healing this pattern doesn't mean becoming harsh. It means tolerating discomfort. Small discomforts, letting someone disagree, letting someone sit with their own feelings, letting silence exist without fixing it. That is regulation. You're not weak for people pleasing. You adapted brilliantly. It probably kept you safe. It probably kept relationships intact. But survival strategies aren't meant to run your adult life. You don't need to earn safety anymore. You don't need to manage every reaction. You don't need to be chosen because you're convenient. Real connection requires authenticity, and authenticity requires boundaries, not walls. Boundaries, you're allowed to disappoint people. You're allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to prioritize yourself. People pleasing isn't your personality. It is a nervous system response. A nervous system can be retrained. Start small. One honest no, one unfiltered opinion, One unmet expectation you don't rush to fix. That is how safety rewires. If this hit, comment kind, not compliant. And if you're ready to stop surviving through approval and start building regulated relationships, subscribe. We are not building agreeable performers. We're building secure leaders.